This isn't just another confession. And it's not some story I made up to scare people. It's something I've lived with for too long, quietly, hoping it would fade with time. But it hasn't. Because what I saw is too gruesome to forget. It's the kind of truth you don't speak unless you're close to the end, and I know I am. What I saw didn't appear as loud or violent at first. It was the kind of evil that hides in routine, dressed in silence, surrounded by people who made it look like just another job. I've kept this to myself for longer than I should have, but the weight of it has only grown heavier. What happened on that flight, booked under Diddy's name, wasn't a mistake. It was organized, deliberate, and terrifying in how normal it seemed. I know I wasn't supposed to talk. But if this is the last time you hear from me, just remember I didn't stay silent. Tell me where you're watching from. If nothing else, I need to know this story isn't dying with me. I never planned to end up in this line of work. Like most people, I started out just looking for something stable. The money was good, the hours were quiet, and flying private meant no screaming passengers or cramped aisles. Most of the time, I didn't even know who I was serving. We weren't paid to know. Just trained to show up, stay in uniform, and disappear into the background. And that's exactly what I did. Until the day I boarded a jet I'll never forget. Because that one belonged to Diddy. The name wasn't on the manifest, of course. These things never come in direct. But those of us who've been around long enough recognize how certain teams move. There's a structure to it. People don't rush, the orders come through quietly. And you can always tell when something's being hidden under what looks like perfect order. At first, nothing seemed out of place. The paperwork was clean. The flight was an overnight trip to Paris, with just a few people onboarding, including his assistants and stylist. One of them was a man I didn't recognize who walked in without eye contact and never gave a name. But it wasn't the people that caught my attention, it was the cargo. 4 containers rolled up quietly, one after the other, with no tags, weight slips, or security check. Not one of them was inspected before being loaded. Usually, we carry designer luggage, boutique shopping hauls, sometimes even cars. But this wasn't that. These weren't the kinds of items you brag about flying. They were steel crates, sealed tight, handled carefully, but with urgency, like they needed to get off the ground fast and disappear into the sky. I tried not to stare, but it was hard to ignore the way the handlers moved. They weren't crew. They weren't airport staff. They didn't wear ID or say a word. They operated like they'd done this 100 times, and every step had already been rehearsed. One of them snapped at a younger boy who flinched near the container ramp, grabbed him by the back of the neck, and shoved him aside. No one said anything, not even the boy. That silence told me more than any checklist could. They weren't calling them workers the way we use the word in aviation. These were something else. I'd never seen people treated like that on any of the flights I'd worked, and I've seen some dark things moved behind luxury curtains. But this was different. The tension wasn't coming from the weight of the cargo. It was coming from what everyone already understood, but didn't want to say out loud. That's when I felt it. That slow, crawling realization that I wasn't just there to serve coffee and close cabinet latches. I was inside something I wasn't supposed to witness. And even if I said nothing, I knew enough to understand this flight wasn't taking off with just metal and luggage on board. The flight had already felt strange long before we reached cruising altitude. Not because of what was said, no one was talking, but because of what was avoided. Everything was too smooth, too controlled. The crew operated in near silence, and even the guests on board moved like they were on edge, but trained to hide it. At this point, my hard training on handling high pressure charters failed me. I felt mentally stressed and began to fear for my life at some point. Diddy boarded the flight shortly before we sealed the cabin. He didn't speak to anyone, didn't offer a nod, just walked straight in with 2 men flanking him, both dressed like security, holding nothing, He passed me in the aisle without eye contact, took a seat in the private rear section, and disappeared behind the partition curtain. The rest of the crew barely reacted. You'd think someone like him would draw attention. But in this world, his silence said more than any greeting ever could. He wasn't there to be seen. He was there to oversee. I went about my duties. Checked the trays. Ran through the basic safety checks. But no one asked for anything. Not even water. The tension in the cabin wasn't loud. It was buried just beneath the surface, like something everyone knew not to disturb. About 2 hours into the flight, I headed toward the galley in the rear. That was when I saw her. She was standing just outside the lavatory, at the end of the corridor, barefoot and still, maybe 13 or younger, wearing a plain white shirt, no shoes, nothing in her hands. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just looked at the ground like she was waiting to be sent back. I froze. Before I could say anything, she turned and slipped into the narrow crew storage space. When I opened it seconds later, it was empty. There was nowhere else to go. But she was gone. I walked back down the aisle, every part of me alert now. No one said anything. I checked the manifest, no minors on board, no unlisted passengers. Just Diddy, his handlers, and the staff. That girl didn't exist, at least not on paper. I glanced toward the rear curtain that separated Diddy's seat. It hadn't moved. His silhouette remained in place, still, relaxed, as if none of this concerned him. Later, I went to check the rear lavatory. Not because I thought she'd be there, but because I needed something to prove I hadn't imagined her. Inside, the door was slightly open. I pushed it in and found one of the younger assistants sitting on the toilet seat, lid down, hunched forward with his face buried in his hands. His shirt was ripped, his shoulders trembling. He clearly was panicking and barely holding together. I stepped in and asked if he was okay. He didn't move, didn't answer. I tried again, softer this time. He still didn't look up. But after a few seconds, he spoke, barely above a whisper. "You saw her," he said, and then he paused, like he was waiting for me to deny it. "Don't look for her," he added. "Don't open anything. Just let it land." He didn't say anything else. And I didn't ask. I closed the door and walked away. And for the first time in my career, I knew I was part of something I couldn't explain and couldn't escape. Not as long as the man sitting behind that curtain kept flying above questions, above law, and above consequence. There comes a point where silence stops being professional and starts feeling like complicity. That point came for me about 30 minutes after I saw the girl. I wasn't just uneasy anymore. I was watching everything. And what I began to notice should have never made it onto a legal flight. I passed by the cargo access again, slow this time, and noticed one of the containers was latched differently. Not wide open, just off by a few degrees, like someone had checked it and forgotten to fully close it. I didn't touch it, but I did look. And what I saw inside should have grounded that plane immediately. The light caught something white. It was a uniform shirt, stained, crumpled, still on the body of a man curled up inside. He wasn't asleep. He was unconscious. Maybe worse. Face pale, skin thin, wrists bruised from restraints. The crate was padded with foam, but not for protection, for silence. I backed away slowly. My hands were shaking, but my face had to stay still. One of Diddy's handlers walked past me moments later, and for a second, I thought he had seen me react. But he didn't stop. He didn't speak. He just glanced at the container with a look I'll never forget. Like it was nothing. Further down the aisle, I passed another sealed compartment. This one wasn't even fully closed. I could hear breathing, labored, shallow, and fast. I stepped closer and caught sight of bare legs pulled tightly into a corner. The girl, older than the first, but barely. Thin, gaunt. Hair tied back in a way that didn't look styled, just controlled. She didn't scream. She didn't move. She just stared like someone whose body was present, but whose mind had long left. Later, one of the stylists on board told another crew member, loud enough for me to hear, that these girls were in the cut. That they were kept hungry so they'd stay camera ready. fit for whatever upcoming performance or appearance Diddy's schedule demanded. They weren't guests. They weren't employees. They were assets, and not even hidden well. I started noticing things I had missed earlier. The quiet instructions passed between crew and code. The trays of untouched food being discarded after takeoff. Not because no one was hungry, but because some weren't allowed to eat. The way one of the girls flinched every time a door clicked behind her, no one cared. Not even the staff. But what was being moved on that plane, what Diddy's team had packaged and transported like it was nothing. Were helpless humans caught in his web. And it was suffering. Some were collapsing under silence. A large number of the women were kept on extreme diets and close to starvation. But all of them were under control and moving slowly to their end, and we were flying them straight into it. We landed just before sunrise. Paris was still half asleep, and the sky was gray with that early morning hush that makes everything feel slower than it is. But inside that cabin, the pace picked up instantly. The cargo door opened before the main cabin. That never happens. Standard protocol always clears passengers first, then luggage. But not this time. The ramp was pulled directly to the side hold, and a team of men in black jackets was already waiting below. No airport uniforms, no ID tags, no customs presence. Just black vans with tinted windows, engines running, silent and ready. The first crate came out quietly, lowered with care like it carried glass instead of people. No scanning, no checks, no names called. The second crate had to be steadied. Something inside shifted. I looked around to see if anyone else noticed. No one blinked. The team below guided it in like they'd done it dozens of times before. I caught a glimpse of one of the girls being helped out of the last container. Helped, not escorted. She couldn't stand on her own. Her legs buckled as they pulled her forward. She wore the same white shirt I'd seen mid-flight. Her hair stuck to her face from sweat, and her knees gave out before she reached the van. No one looked at her. No one said her name. They lifted her like a bag of clothes and slid the door shut. The young worker from the lavatory came next. They didn't let him walk either. He was carried by two men from Diddy's crew, head down, one arm dangling. Someone handed a brown envelope to a man standing by the second van. He flipped it open, glanced inside, nodded once, and tucked it under his coat. That was it. No forms, no signatures. Just a nod. Diddy was the last to leave. He stepped off calmly, unbothered, fresh clothes, sunglasses on. He didn't acknowledge anyone. Just walked to the black SUV that had been parked away from the vans, opened the door himself, and got in. The driver didn't even wait for instructions. The car pulled off before the last crate hit the ground. No one stopped him. No one questioned anything. I watched it all from the edge of the cabin door, frozen, holding a clipboard that didn't matter. I'd been trained to account for luxury, to log wines, bags, art. But I hadn't been trained to account for people moved like freight. Girls who couldn't walk, workers who didn't speak, lives that didn't seem to belong to themselves anymore. I stood there until the last crate was gone, until the vans were swallowed by the city, and then Diddy's convoy disappeared around the corner. And I realized then, this wasn't just a one-off. This wasn't a mistake either. I should have felt relief once we landed. That's what usually happens. You finish the job, the guests leave, the weight lifts, and you start preparing for the next rotation. But nothing about this felt like an ending. Not even close. The plane was quiet now, but I couldn't move. I sat at the back for nearly 20 minutes, still in uniform, hands clasped in my lap, staring at the galley wall like it was supposed to explain something. But there was nothing to explain what I'd just been a part of. Nothing to soften it. I'd seen too much, and no one had said a word. I watched people disappear into vans. I watched someone who couldn't walk be hauled off like a product. I watched Diddy walk past it all like it was background noise. And the worst part is, I did nothing. I just stood there. That night, I couldn't sleep, not from fear, from guilt. From the sound of the crates rolling across the metal ramp. From the way the girl's legs gave out. From the way the boy in the lavatory said, "Don't look for her," like he already knew no one ever would. The next morning, I checked the internal logbook from the flight. The cargo entries were gone. No crate codes, no weight history, no fuel discrepancy for what should have been a heavier flight. The staff list had been amended, 2 names removed. One of them was the worker from the lavatory. He never existed, apparently. Not officially. I thought about asking around, seeing if anyone else had noticed. But that's not how this world works. We don't ask. We don't push. We lose our jobs, or worse, our names get removed too. I kept telling myself maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she was sick. Maybe they were part of some undisclosed transfer. But those maybes don't hold up when the same faces fly the same routes, over and over, and the silence keeps stacking around them. Every part of my training told me to move on, close it out, write a report, let it go. But this one wouldn't let go of me. Sometimes I replay it just to see if I can spot the exact moment I became part of it. And I think it was earlier than I realized. Maybe it was when I saw those containers get loaded and said nothing. Maybe it was when I saw her standing by the lavatory and didn't speak. Or maybe it was when I looked at Diddy and assumed that someone like him wouldn't be involved in something like this. But he was. And we all knew it. And if you're still listening, if you've made it this far, just think about this. If that flight made it across borders without anyone stopping it, how many more have? In the days after the flight, I told myself I'd move on. I'd done what I was trained to do. I didn't break any laws. I didn't touch anything. I didn't speak. But silence doesn't clean blood off your hands. It just buries the stain deeper. I tried to distract myself with other assignments. Routine flights, clean checklists, familiar faces. But nothing felt the same. Every crew member who looked away too fast, every unchecked crate, every unspoken instruction. I started seeing them all differently. I started seeing myself differently. I went back into the system to find the flight file. It was gone. The flight number still existed, but it had been reassigned to a different route. The original manifest wiped. The crate logs missing. The airport clearance timestamp adjusted to show we never landed when we did. Every trace of that trip had been scrubbed. Almost like it never happened. The boy I saw in the lavatory. I searched the employee logs for his ID. It didn't exist. I looked for him in our internal crew comms, no mentions. His photo, not filed. But I remember his voice. I remember his face. I remember the way he said, "Don't open anything," like he knew it was already too late. I got a message from dispatch a few days later. Short and out of place. It didn't mention the flight. It didn't accuse me of anything. It just said, "Appreciate your discretion." No name. No signature. That's when I stopped sleeping through the night. I started checking my door twice before bed. Not because I thought someone would show up, but because I didn't want to be surprised if they did, because once you've seen how easily people can be moved, like property, how quietly they disappear, you stop assuming you're safe just because no one's knocking. There are things you're allowed to know in this industry. And then there are things you're just supposed to accept. I've tried to carry this like a secret. I've tried to be smart about it. Careful. Quiet. But some truths don't sit in silence. They don't shrink just because you stop saying them out loud. They grow. They burn. And when you let them burn long enough, they start taking parts of you with them. There was a moment 2 days after the flight where I thought about telling someone, a colleague. He's worked the same kind of charters. I thought maybe he'd understand. We were standing outside dispatch, waiting for a handoff, and he asked how the Paris trip went. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out, just a nod and a half smile. I couldn't even form the words. I just kept hearing that boy's voice. Don't open anything. Sometimes it's not the trauma that gets you. It's the way everyone else keeps moving. Like nothing happened. Like no one else heard the breathing in the crates. Like no one else saw a child vanish down a hallway, barefoot, too afraid to speak. I remember the sound her feet made on the metal floor. Soft taps. Quick. Like she wasn't just lost, like she knew she had to hide again before someone noticed. I remember how hollow her eyes looked, even without meeting mine. And I remember the boy's shoulders in the lavatory, hunched like he was already buried, even though he was still breathing. I think about them more than I should. In traffic, in the middle of a shift, late at night when it's too quiet and my mind won't stop showing me what I saw. I used to believe that if something was truly evil, someone would stop it. I don't believe that anymore. I believe people look away. I believe silence is traded like currency. And I believe that most of us, deep down, are just trying to survive long enough to forget what we've seen. But forgetting doesn't change what's still happening. And if I'm being honest, it's not just the guilt that keeps me up. It's the fear that it'll happen again. That it's already happened again. That somewhere right now, another jet is sitting on another runway with the same crates, the same silence, the same people looking the other way. So if you're still here, still listening, don't let this be just another video you scroll past. If you've ever seen something you weren't supposed to, if you've ever looked at someone and knew they were in the middle of something they couldn't escape, say something. Even if it's just one line. One word. Tell me where you're watching from. Not because I need validation, but because I need to know someone else still sees what's wrong when everything around it looks so perfectly packaged. This wasn't a rumor. It wasn't a theory. It happened. I was there. And if stories like this ever stop showing up, just remember, I tried to tell the truth before they buried it with me. If any part of this felt familiar, if you've seen things you weren't supposed to talk about, say something in the comments. Where did it happen? What did you see? Maybe if enough of us speak, they won't be able to silence all of us. Like, share, and subscribe if you're still watching, because staying quiet doesn't make it go away. It just helps them keep flying.